Yeah, where you going?
Chicago.
Chicago? You know you're in St. Louis?
Yes, I do.
Steve Martin gets into another curbside altercation with some guy who punches him in the face. Guess what? Dell is going to come to the rescue with his own rental car.
Get your car out of here! What is your problem? Can't you see we got an injured man down on the street?
He knocked this guy out and Dell's like, help him out. And the guy was like, I'll help him up. And then just grabbed him by the ball sack and lifted him in the air. It's like, whoa.
Now I'll move my car, but I want you to help him up. My pleasure.
That guy had problems at home and he took it out on a stranger. I mean, to grab a guy's testicles
And to hoist him up.
takes conviction. I don't think I could ever mess with another man's sack. I know how much it hurts.
No remorse.
Yeah, you have to not care about another human being to It's insane, dude. It's an insane proposition to think someone looks at you and says, hey, help this guy up. And you're like, oh, I'll help him up. And just right in his balls, man. That's tough.
St. Louis, man.
I've never seen a guy get picked up by his testicles before.
Gobble, gobble, Colonels. Welcome to the concession stand Thanksgiving table. Brought to you by the Just Play It podcast. Go ahead, pull up a chair, grab a plate of popcorn, corn dogs, nachos, those little pickled jalapenos, M&Ms, and maybe a Coca-Cola. Because that's what we serve every single week when we're talking movies. I'm one of your gracious hosts. I'm Captain Pop. I am Jimmy Crack Corn. I'm one of the family members. I'm your crazy cousin at the table spewing political comments while we eat turkey. Because that's what you do on Thanksgiving. It's a family affair. And it's here. We're here. I am here. And my best friend is here. He is the corn dog himself. He is my best friend, my best amigo. It is Mr. Nick Jerry Cranberry Sauce Justice over there. Welcome in, buddy.
As always, my friend, you just flatter me with these introductions, but thank you so much.
With cranberry sauce?
I am the corn dog. If James is your cousin spitting political stuff at the Thanksgiving table, I'm your uncle who takes it a little too far. But hey, that's who we are. We're here for a meal of corn dogs and popcorns and movies and all of the things. And I'm so excited to be here. You know, summer went by, summer is gone, spooky season came by, spooky season is gone. And it's just different. You know, it's that time of year you're starting to get a little, sweats, maybe a sweatshirt on, depending the area of the country you're in. And it's cozy movie watching weather is what it is, buddy.
Yeah, I don't actually bring up politics. I actually hate that. But, that's what happens on Thanksgiving. It is Thanksgiving week. And like you said, Nick, the year is just flying by, which means we are one step closer to our Christmas movie. And we are going to be another step closer to the wrap party, which is our end of the year episode. Going to be end of the year episodes this year. However, we're going to have a part 1, part 2. So stay tuned for that. There's going to be a lot of fan polls and stuff to look out for on our socials. So make sure you're following us at Just Play It Podcast on Instagram and YouTube, and Just Play It Pod on X. Look out. It's coming. We be coming. And in the meantime, we're going to keep doing what we do, which is watch movies. Nick, we have a very on-brand holiday movie of planes, trains, and automobiles to discuss. First time watch for me over here.
Not first time for me, but probably the first time where I can remember things happening. This was something that got played in the house. At first, we'll discuss this. I thought, oh, this is nice and family friendly. And then you hit a 30-second portion of the movie that is not family friendly. And I distinctly remember that part getting fast forwarded in my house. So this was watched in my younger days. However, this was really the first watch as far as really, quote unquote, watching and
you got to see the whole movie.
Yeah. So
you got to see the whole movie this time.
It's a first watch in spirit.
When was the last time you watched it?
Oh, buddy, it would have been well over 15, 20 years ago.
We need to set a a year window of when it's basically the first time again. Like if you haven't seen something in 10 years, 15. So basically a first watch.
I'm watching with fresh eyes, no doubt about it.
The definitive Thanksgiving movie. I don't know if there is another Thanksgiving movie that is as popular, but this is it. This is it. And we watched it. We're going to talk about it. But Nick, before we even get into that turkey leg crazy road trip, we got some business to take care of. We got to do our weekly quiz.
We have a title to defend.
And we invite everybody to play along. And I believe we are on a 14-week streak of going perfect, Nick. And I'm hoping that we can go 15 and might as well just go 16 to finish off the year. This is the Cinematrix quiz brought to you by vulture.com. It's a daily quiz they put out. It's a 3x3 grid quiz. There is 9 squares. You get 9 guesses only. So if you miss one, you're not going perfect. We got 3 actors. We get 3 categories. And we are trying to hit the top percentage of players playing for the day. So our peak is top 1%, which means we've answered with really rare answers for movies, because the whole point of this game is you need to match up the actor with the category. And you can think about the most popular movie, sure, but the big high points are where those rare answers are at. So, Nick, who do we have for our actors?
For our actors, we have actor or director Jim Henson. We have actor or director Frank Oz. And actor Jason Segel or Michael Caine.
Okay. And our categories are Muppet movie. Title begins with the and double letters in title. Now, Nick, this is when I usually ask you, how confident are you feeling?
With Jim Henson and Frank Oz, not great.
You know what? Miracles happen, Nick. Miracles happen every day. So, all right. Well, let's go ahead and start unpacking this puppy. Let's start up with Jim Henson, actor or director, and Muppet movie. Jim Henson's known for the Muppets. Does he voice any of the Muppets? Does he puppeteer any of the Muppets? Does that count as being an actor?
So would he get titled with some kind of director credits? Like, do we just sweep Muppet movies here?
Well, we can't sweep Muppet movies here because
he passed in 1990.
Do you want to save Jim Henson for last and maybe knock out the ones that we at least can maybe have a chance at?
Yeah, let's do that.
Let's reverse Uno. Let's go down to the bottom row. So we have Jason Segel or Michael Caine. Now, Jason Segel was in the Muppets movie, for the 2008 one or whatever. Yeah. Was it called the Muppets movie?
See, here's where
it's gonna get Muppety, everybody.
Yeah,
or was it the Muppets?
The options are, when I type in the Muppets, all I get is the Muppets. So I'm going to go with the Muppets.
Oh, crap. Okay. All right. Let's do this.
Okay.
On the board.
50%.
50%. Okay.
All right.
Now we can move away from Muppetville and we can do title begins with the and double letters in title. Can you actually click on double letters in title just so I can see what the rules are on that one? I'm assuming it just means letters back to back. So any film title with a word that contains a letter or numeral followed by the same letter
numeral
consecutively, undivided by a space or punctuation.
Okay, numerals help actually a lot in this one. Okay.
All
right, let's stick with Jason Segel or Michael Caine. Title begins with the. James, I'm not worried about rarity in this one. I'm trying to survive this quiz.
Okay. Right.
So, The Dark Knight or The Dark Knight Rises for Michael Caine was the first thing
I was thinking that
came to mind for me.
I'm okay with just playing the survive game. Like, we don't have to get all cheeky because we're already on the ropes with this one. So let's go with the Dark Knight Rises.
We're going with Rises. 12%.
12.
Okay.
All right. Double letter and title.
I was going to go with just Forgetting Sarah Marshall.
I was going to say, does Forgetting have 2 T's in it in a row?
That's why I typed it in, and so does Marshall. So it actually...
Why is Jason Segel grouped with Michael Caine?
Dude, that's what I'm saying. I looked at this quiz, and I freaked out. So let's see how that gets us. That's 60% okay. Survive. Now,
right.
the reason I said the numerals matter for this, because do you know Frank Oz, like his famous role, right?
Yoda.
Yeah, this is Yoda. So Star Wars Episode 2 would be numerals for double letters. As far as Muppet movie goes, I have no idea. I know he's the
Nick,
voice of
what if
Grover on Sesame Street. Oh, are you going to hit me with something? Hit me with something.
What if I hit you with something fucking crazy right now? Because Frank Oz directed a movie we watched this year, and it counts for one of these categories. No, we did not watch a Muppets movie, but we did watch The Indian in the Cupboard, directed by Frank fucking Oz.
Oh, James, you are the man. What a poll. The Indian in the Cupboard for title begins with the 3%.
Let's freaking go! Oh, pod movies.
You got Aubrey's dumb face in the middle of this grid.
Right in the middle where he belongs. Oh my gosh, Nick, you are the GOAT at this quiz, but I'm not going to lie, that felt pretty damn good, on top of that being a podcast movie, which just makes it even sweeter.
So double letters in titles. It said numerals, so I can go with Star Wars Episode 2 or 3.
Let's go clones.
Let's go clones. 20%.
All right, 20%.
Okay. Now the Frank Oz Muppet movie.
Nick, I was very excited to drop The Indian in the Cupboard, but now it's going to be, this might be territory of the streak may end. The streak may end here.
So here's what I'm thinking.
Fucking Muppets. This is Tyler Perry all over again.
He was on Sesame Street with Jim Henson, and he did the voice of Grover. I know that. It's Yoda and Grover, and I believe he's also Miss Piggy, and might be Fozzie Bear as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
So
we could do Muppets Take Manhattan, or the Pirate Treasure movie, the Treasure Island Muppets movie.
Muppets from Space, maybe? Like whatever we want to do.
All right, this is blind. This is blind for me. I have no idea if this is going to work, so.
I remember Muppets from Space being when I was younger. I recommend Muppets from Space.
Oh, God, here we go.
14%. Okay.
Oh, my God. These have so much tension behind them.
If we survive... All right, let's not... Jim Henson.
Jim Henson's going to be tough.
Now, when we typed in earlier, the Muppets, there is a Jim Henson's Turkey Hollow.
Okay, Turkey Hollow. That's a double letter. Fucking throw it in.
Is this kind of... Are we doing a
we're being cringe. We're being cringe.
Be cringe.
That's what other people do. We're going to do it. No! Oh.
We cringed.
Maybe it was just like presented by Jim Henson. We were hoping it was a documentary. The streak has been broken, ladies and gentlemen. That is 14 in a row. That's our record, and it ends today. All right, well, for pride, Nick, let's just go ahead and go out with the two answers we have left.
I did see something. If I type in The Muppets, we get Henson's Place, the man behind the Muppets.
That would probably work. That sounds like a documentary.
Yeah, let's try that.
So that we could be upset that we didn't pick it.
6%.
It's 6%. It worked. Crap. Would we have had other answers?
Jim Henson absolutely had me. Like, is the Muppets Wizard of Oz while he is still alive?
Let's find out.
No.
Nope.
Well, James.
All right. Well, 7 out of 9. We haven't been wrong in months. Not since June. We've been wrong.
Sometimes you just run into a buzzsaw, James.
All right, Nick. Well, we're top 44% of players of the day. Jeez Louise, that's bad.
That's rough.
We're angry if we're not low single percentage digits over here. But the most popular answer, starting out with our boy Jim Henson, Muppet movie is going to be, guess what? The Muppet movie. Starting with it's going to be The Dark Crystal. Never heard of that. And The Muppets Take Manhattan for double letter or numeral.
Surprised that was pre-1990, before Jim Henson passed. For our boy Frank Oz, for a Muppet movie, we have Muppet Treasure Island, an absolute classic. For movies starting with the word "the," we have Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back. I'm surprised it doesn't start with Star Wars. And then for our double letter category, we have Little Shop of Horrors.
And finishing it off with our boys of Jason Segel and Michael Caine. Muppets movie, most popular is going to be The Muppets with Jason Segel, like we said, 50%. For a title starting with the, it's going to be The Dark Knight. So good on us for going The Dark Knight Rises. And for getting Sarah Marshall is the answer we picked for double letters. Now, Nick, let's move over to the rarest answers. Can you read to the audience what the rarest answers were for Jim Henson?
For Jim Henson, for involving Muppets, we have Follow That Bird. That looks like Sesame Street to me.
Maybe he directed it.
Yeah, but this is involving Muppets.
Maybe there's a Muppet in it.
Is Sesame Street and Muppets?
Are they the same thing?
I don't know, because I'm looking down, I'm cheating. I'm looking down at Frank Oz, and I see Elmo and Grouchland.
Wait, are they Muppets?
If they're Muppets, that kind of pisses me off, because I could have Sesame Streeted my way around this.
Is Elmo a Muppet? Yes, Elmo is a Muppet character on the children's television show Sesame Street. What? I didn't know. I thought they were different things.
I thought it was a property thing. Oh, that kind of pisses me off.
There's a Reddit. It says Reddit r/Muppets. Is Elmo a Muppet? I know he is part of the Henson multiverse, but he's not specifically part of the Muppet Show. On Sesame Street, also, they never explicitly say if they're Muppets, whereas on the Muppet Show, they do. Someone please explain me. I love how there's just a post dedicated to this. Explain. Maybe I'm just really dumb, but this is hurting my head.
Yeah. All right. Well, for Jim Henson, for the starting with the, we have Jim Henson's The Storyteller. Did that pop up when we typed in Jim Henson?
I don't know.
There's some fuckery in this quiz. And then for double letter, we also have Jim Henson's The Storyteller.
Moving down to actor or director Frank Oz. For Muppet adjacent movie, apparently, it is The Adventures of Elmo in Grouchland. For the, beginning the title, we have The Great Gilly Hopkins. And for double letter or numerals, we have Blues Brothers 2000. That was smart.
Yep, and then to wrap it up, for Jason Segel / Michael Caine, for Muppets adjacent, we have The Muppet Christmas Carol, which, oh, that's right, Michael Caine was in that one. And then for starting with the word the, we have The Last Witch Hunter with Vin Diesel. And wrapping it up for double letter, we have Battle of Great Britain.
Big yikes, Nick. Okay, well, Jason Segel and Michael Caine are a weird duo to group together, kind of an odd couple, which is exactly the kind of movie we watched this week. Because, Nick, we watched Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. It stars the odd couple. It is written and directed by John Hughes, and that odd couple is going to be Steve Martin and John Candy. An absolute Thanksgiving classic. Yeah, first time watch for me. That I wanted to see if this movie A, held up, B, lived up to the hype. And I think it did. Nick, what do we got for the dollar signs?
For dollar signs, we have an estimated budget of $15 million and a worldwide box office of $49.5 million. So tripled your money.
This is a Paramount joint, and apparently during, I guess for $15 million, they were able to do all of the coverage they needed for John Hughes' process in this film, because he is a hell of a screenwriter. He can pump out scripts over a weekend, and they could be super concise and super focused. Yeah, and something can spring off just a simple idea. And I think after he met Molly Ringwald, he just immediately pumped out 16 Candles, and he's like, here, read this. And for this one in particular, it is based off a true story. It's based off an experience that he had. He was traveling from New York to Chicago. He did end up in Phoenix, Arizona via Wichita, Kansas. And he did meet a guy who was knowledgeable about the snow traveling. And I believe he was traveling during Thanksgiving. So he's like, oh, this is a perfect movie idea. And then he'll just disappear for 3 days and then come out with a 140-page script.
That's some talent.
It's some talent. And he pumped out the script, a pretty long script, 140 pages. The rule of thumb is you have a minute for each page. So that's over a 2-hour movie. Apparently, this movie was cut to be 4 hours, and they had to get together and obviously cut some stuff out. So the first pass, it went from 4 hours to 2.5. And they spent 85 days, I believe, shooting this movie. 85. Wow. That's long.
That's a lot.
Long for a movie, very long for a comedy. Very long for a comedy. A lot of that is going to be from chasing snow. So they had to try and find the right snow for the exterior shots, which I think we both can appreciate and find refreshing versus all the CGI we see these days. So the elements are part of this movie. Literally a big plot point is they get snowed out of an airport and have to get rerouted. So there's going to be chasing weather all across the East Coast, Midwest. There's some LA shots here and there. Steve Martin is a rock star comedian at this point. John Candy is up and coming. He's getting some good film roles here and there in the 80s.
Now, question are they both SNL cast members at this point?
John Candy was part of SCTV, which is Second City TV. It's Canada's reaction to SNL. He's in the spotlight, and people do know him, and he's getting a lot of iconic roles in the 80s. Part and thanks to John Hughes, Uncle Buck, this role in this movie. So yeah, you got some big top billed guys. You're traveling around. Still only $15 million to pull that off and have a 4-hour cut, and then cut it down to 90 minutes. And when I was reading about it, the editor said, oh, the first pass we cut out 1 hour and 10 minutes, so which is a third of the 4-hour runtime. So basically we just eliminated 28 shooting days. So 28 days you went out, you got up at 6 a.m., you put on your hair and makeup, you got the microphone charged up, you found the perfect snow, you did all these improv bits on camera. 28 of those days are gone. There's a super long cut in the John Hughes vault, but
I feel like you could have saved yourself a lot of money by cutting those early when you first saw the script. But I'm not here to question John Hughes, so
yeah. And I want to talk about that more. I want to talk about that more after we talk about the plot of this movie, and we're going to get into that right now. I'm going to read you this log line, and we're going to jump into plot talk.
Let's do it.
Our log line for planes, trains, and automobiles is: a Chicago advertising man must struggle to travel home from New York for Thanksgiving with a lovable oaf of a shower curtain ring salesman as his only companion.
Whoa.
All right. Pretty specific, but I think I'll watch it. And now let's dive into that story via plot talk.
Plot talk.
All right, James. So that Chicago advertising man, that's going to be our main character here. That's Neil Page. This is Steve Martin. He's our guy. He is that advertising exec, and he is visiting New York City. Reminds me a little bit like we talked about in Fatal Attraction, right? You're just a businessman in New York City. We don't know what you exactly do. We don't know why you're there. We have no view into your workplace. You're just a businessman. You're in a suit. And like we talked about earlier, it is Thanksgiving time. So we got to get home, away from New York City, back to Chicago. And right off the bat, we could tell that this is going to be a whole laborious thing to get back to Chicago, because getting out of his advertising meeting, he's going to try and get a cab. Impossible to get a cab. He's already running late for his flight. He runs into this douchebag lawyer who he's like, hey, can I take this cab? I'm going to appeal to your better nature. The lawyer's like, nah. And Steve Martin, or Neil Page, says, how about for $10? He says, how about $20? How about $50? The lawyer says, okay. So Neil Page is getting his money out. He says, well, surely a man who will pay $50 will pay $75. And I'm like, early piece of shit candidate right here. This guy.
Well, it would have been great for us indulging in our podcast if it was what's his nuts from Fatal Attraction. If it was Michael Douglas, maybe he had to go like cover up his tracks with Alex Forrest.
There you go.
But this is after he already gets shafted from the meeting of taking too long. A lot of Seinfeld type comedy off the rip. Just a lot of just facial expressions and just relatable situations. So immediately I bought in. I was like, this is gonna be enjoyable.
It's a lot of, like you said, the facial expressions and the body movements. It's your classic 80s, a lot of physical humor, right? We know John Candy's in this, and we're going to get a lot of that as well, like faces being made and movements being made that are hilarious. Honestly, I love this era of comedy. I really do. It's a sweet spot for me. Also, in this moment of chasing down a cab, we do chase down a character. I don't know his name. I don't think he has a name, but it is Kevin Bacon.
It's Taxi Racer.
It's Taxi Racer. It's Kevin Bacon.
I was going to say, don't you dare gloss over the Kevin Bacon cameo before we get to that lawyer. But yeah, no, Kevin Bacon. And again, this is just a little snippet. This is a reel in today's times of relatable situations, hilarity, because apparently getting a cab at 5 or 6, whatever, New York. We don't get New York. Never been to New York. Have you been to New York?
I've never been to New York. My wife wants to take me to New York really bad. I've never been to New York.
So we don't know this hustle and bustle, but apparently hailing a cab at this time in 1987.
Whole thing.
Is a whole thing. And Kevin Bacon and Steve Martin see the same cab, and then they're across the street and they're running parallel to each other through the busy, filled with pedestrians and New York bellhops. They're dodging people, tripping on suitcases. So Kevin Bacon, yeah, you thought he was going to be in this movie. No, he has no speaking lines. He's literally just Taxi Racer. And so currently Kevin Bacon is in this other movie that's being directed by John Hughes called She's Having a Baby, which is going to release the following year. And they know each other, and he says, I'm also shooting this other movie. And I think Kevin Bacon just read it and said, I want to be in this. Like, I don't care like what I am. Just I'll be an extra. And he basically was an extra because he had no speaking lines.
Yeah.
And was Kevin Bacon baconing in the 80s at this point? Was he? I'm sure Footloose came out at this point.
There was a movie, Quicksilver, that not many people know about, but it was Kevin Bacon-y. I'm sure he was thinking being on set with Steve Martin and possibly John Candy. So you don't pass that up. I mean, Steve Martin was hot. I mean, we know him now. If you're a younger member of the listening audience here, you know him from Only Murders in the Building, maybe
Cheaper by the Dozen.
Thank you. That's the exact movie I was thinking of.
Panther.
I couldn't remember. But I mean, Steve Martin was hot. I mean, he was one of the top comedians, in the mid 80s, early 80s, late 80s, through the early 90s even. And so, but let's get back to the movie here. So Neil, he's getting caught up in that classic New York bibbity bullshit. And he does get a cab. He does negotiate with this lawyer. But while he's negotiating, some guy throws his luggage in the trunk and takes off in the cab. Neil's going to chase him down. And when we get up to who's the passenger in the seat, this is our first introduction into Del Griffith. This is John Candy. I almost didn't recognize him with the curly hair and the mustache. I mean, obviously you recognize John Candy, but the look was not the John Candy look I was used to.
So John Candy was very excited to play this role, and he read the script and he loved it. Apparently he got a perm for it because he said Del Griffith would be the type of guy to have a perm. So I love that you brought that up.
Yeah. It was a little uncharacteristic for, what I know about John Candy, but I absolutely love it. But the cab does take off. Neil does get to the airport. Flight gets delayed. Again, it's a comedy of errors, right? Everything that could go wrong is going wrong, but we do get on the airplane. Neil does not get the first class ticket he thought that he had paid for. He has to sit and coach. Big wig marketing exec has to sit coach. And James, Who are we going to be sitting next to?
Del Griffith, John Candy. And before they got on the plane, Del Griffith is sitting across from him in the waiting area, and Neil recognizes him from the taxi cab situation. He says, "Oh, like this is the guy that stole my cab." And there's this hilarious cab memory, I'll call it, where he's looking at John Candy, and then it cuts to Steve Martin, cuts back to John Candy, and then they just put a taxi door in the airport terminal and dress John Candy up in his outfit and hat that he was in the taxi as a flash memory from Neil's POV. And I thought, this is going to be great. This movie's going to be funny. Like this is the comedic ingenuity they're going to hit us with. This is great. Also, Del is reading a book that's called The Canadian Mounted. Still have zero idea if this is a real book or a prop for the movie. Apparently it's a real book, but it's a pornographic novel. And that's hilarious. That this lonely
it just
guy
seems like something John Candy would do.
Do you know how Planes, Trains, and Automobiles is related to 2024, Nick? There's a couple references in one of the biggest movies of the year, Deadpool and Wolverine. Ryan Reynolds, fellow Canadian, like John Candy, huge John Candy fan, put a couple Easter eggs of Planes, Trains, and Automobiles in Deadpool and Wolverine. The Canadian Mounted book that John Candy reads makes a cameo in Deadpool 2. And Deadpool and Wolverine was a kind of spun as this is going to be a Planes, Trains, and Automobiles type movie where we have two characters. There's the straight man and the goofy guy, and they're coming together and figuring out their differences for a common goal. The car that they end up destroying at the end of this movie does appear in the void in Deadpool and Wolverine.
Really?
Along with Del's trunk, his big trunk that's so heavy, and Neil actually tripped over and made him miss that initial cab that Kevin Bacon got. And then lastly, there is a TVA worker with a mug that says, "I like me," which is quoting the famous monologue from John Candy in this movie. So Brian Reynolds, huge John Candy fan, actually making a documentary about John Candy with Colin Hanks that's supposed to come out here soon. But
that's amazing.
Yeah.
The Canadian actors do stick together.
Yeah, he says get ready for a lot of laughs and a lot of tears for that one. But yeah, a lot of Deadpool and Wolverine ties and Deadpool ties. So this movie was very impressionable to a young 11-year-old Ryan Reynolds. And Del is a hell of a character. He is the character, I'll say.
He is the character. Yeah.
They are flight buddies. And like we said, Steve Martin is the straight man and John Candy is the goofball in this scenario. So Neil just wants to be left alone on the flight. I'm one of those guys. I'm like, put in my headphones, don't talk to me, I'm good. And then there's those chatty Cathys that just chat your ear off, which is Del.
So we're on the plane. A blizzard is going to divert our plane into Wichita, Kansas. We're trying to get another flight. The airport's so busy, and Del is going to tell Neil, hey, you should get a hotel while you can, because we find out Del's very connected. He has friends in every industry. And so whenever something's about to happen, Del goes, well, I talked to my guy, and he says X. And his guy told him that the flight's not going to take off. You may as well book for a hotel now. Neil doesn't. But Del knows a guy who owns a motel, somewhere in Wichita. So he says, hey, I'll get you a room. Don't worry about it. We get to the hotel. Again, like this movie's just plot movement and then shenanigans, which again, 80s comedy formula that I'm a sucker for. So we're at the motel. They have to share a room, of course. It's actually really funny. They get to the room. They both look at the bed. It's just one bed. Then there's just this ominous music as the camera focuses on the single bed. And then they start talking like, oh, hey, whoa, like, hey, I'm not that kind of guy. Like, you want to take a shower? Like, oh, by yourself, I mean. Yeah, he's like, well, I'm not that guy. Then they both look at the bed again, and the ominous music hits. So it's good. And this whole movie, Neil doesn't like Del. Again, like you said, on the plane, wants to be left alone, has no interest in making a friend. Del is a very kind-hearted soul, almost like naive. to social, might be a little autistic. Doesn't quite pick up the social cues that Neil is putting down of, hey, I don't want to be friends. But Del is just so.
Can you say that?
Yeah, you can say that. Like, it's just
Okay.
a little on the spectrum, right? Just a little on the spectrum.
A little tistic. We should copyright this. A little tistic.
Little tistic. Touch of the tism.
No, not little. Lil tistic. Trademarked.
This is where we get the I like me speech, right? I'm an easy target, but you can make fun of me, but I like me. And I've heard that in pop culture, and I never really knew where it came from. So when I heard this in the movie, I thought, oh, they're going to reference that Del's just this silly guy. He pulled this from somewhere else. No, this is the origination of that speech, and it's actually a really good dramatic monologue.
This is a Del original. All right. Get it straight. The monologue was really good. The only thing I wish happened was I wish we got it later in the movie. I felt like it wasn't quite earned at this point because this is first act. It's very early in the.
I think we're 26 minutes in on an hour and a half.
So, well, then on the other side, it makes me think it's hilarious because it seems like Del probably practiced this in anticipation of.
It's not his first time giving this speech.
Or rehearsing it, so that kind of tracks and can be hilarious. It'd be funny if he said it again to somebody else later, but yeah, since it is serious, I thought it'd be better if it was later in the movie, like after a halfway climax, after the car burned down, get us to like that real breaking point. But it was a good monologue. It was good.
It was, and I always think it's good to remember that comedic actors are still actors, right? And they're still really good at this stuff, right? Just because you can act and are funny doesn't mean you can't hit that serious note to the point where you take them seriously, right? This is John Candy, right? This is mid to late 80s, early 90s king of comedy. He's one of those guys, right? He is like one generation before Chris Farley, but the exact same energy. Like a Belushi, Candy, Farley, right? These guys, the physical comedy guys. And you forget that this guy is still a really good actor. And it still hits me today, right? Like when Will Ferrell takes on something a little more serious, you go, oh yeah. Yeah, Will Ferrell can act. Chris Pratt can act.
When those action guys go comedic, like when Mark Wahlberg started doing more comedies, it was like he's almost funnier than Will Ferrell and the other guys in some points because we're used to him being a certain way. And same thing goes for when comedians go serious. It kind of feels like it hits a little harder because you're like, oh my God, they're being serious. But they're people too. They're people, they're actors.
Yeah.
This movie's all about the human condition. So we do already hit that breaking point in this hotel. We get this whole cuddle joke with apparently the crew could not stop laughing when they were filming John Candy spooning Steve Martin and nuzzling, and John Hughes would be like, okay, now kiss his ear. Okay, now like nuzzle his head. And then they're like, man, we can't do this. We can't keep a straight face and do this.
So I'll bring this up later, but to me, this really felt like a precursor to Tommy Boy, right? Where David Spade's the straight man and Chris Farley, and they're on this road trip, and there's just all these shenanigans that happen. And comedians from back then would, for the gag, would just kiss you on the lips kind of thing, right? Like they didn't have this filter or this line where they're like, oh no, that's a little weird. Like everything was on the table for the sake of comedy. And that's why I love this genre, like this era of comedies. So like that bit, like you're sitting there going like, oh, there's no way. And he's nibbling on Steve Martin's ear.
Yeah. They're like, nibble on his ear. And then they start cracking up. In the middle of all the snuggling and cuddling that they're doing, there is a pickpocket thief that breaks into the hotel room with a switchblade, steals some cash, the credit cards too, but no, because they have the credit cards later.
Yeah, steals all the cash.
Yeah. Oh, they swap credit cards when they were paying for the hotel initially.
There's a lot of shenanigans that happen. It's hard to keep up with. Like, I don't know how much of what Del is doing is intentional, like switching credit cards, and how much is just like, whoa, that happened. So it's hard to keep track.
but they do have a lot of money stolen from them. And then they need to try and find a different way to Chicago still. So they're going to figure that they're going to travel by train, which is a Dell idea because he is suspiciously really good at living on the road.
Neil buys the train tickets and he says, oh, there aren't two seats next to each other, although it's a pretty empty train. So Dell's used to maybe getting ditched a little bit, but he's still very upbeat and positive. But this train is going to blow an engine, break down. I don't really know what trains do. So the train dies pretty much. But in this process, you're seeing that Dell is rubbing off on Neil, who's uptight, and he's starting to be a little more open, a little more fun. But the train dies, so they got to walk to the closest town. Neil sees Dell. Dell knows he got ditched, but Neil still runs through the mud to catch up to him, helps him carry that big trunk, that luggage you were talking about that makes a cameo in Deadpool and Wolverine. And Dell looks at him and says, have you ever traveled by bus? And so now we got to get on a bus to St. Louis. We actually find out that Dell's a really good salesman, right? He sells those shower curtain rings. And so we get this little montage of him selling rings. And I just know that a lot of this movie, it'd be hard to have a 4-hour script and also have these comedians who I'm sure are improvising a lot. So I'm sure a lot of this shower ring selling are just, he probably had 50 takes of John Candy using these selling techniques, and he had to choose 4 or 5 of them. And they do make enough money to get some breakfast and get on a bus to St. Louis. They're singing songs. Neil does try to open up singing a song. No one knows what it is, so instead they just sing the theme song for the Flintstones. So you can tell Neil's a little weird, a little awkward, and Dell is just, right, the life of the party. This big, lovable oaf that everybody just gravitates towards.
Very suspiciously good at living on the road and learning how to make money. Little subtle hints of what his deal is. Spoilers, he's homeless and lives on the road.
He's a hobo. In the technical sense. Like hopping, living on the road kind of hobo.
Technically a hobo.
So we get to St. Louis and Neil informs him, hey, and he tries to softball him because he thinks Dell is stupid. Dell's not stupid. He's just an optimist and says, hey, we'll probably get to where we want to go faster if we go our separate ways here. And Dell goes, oh, okay, like, I hear what you're saying. He's been ditched before. We know this. And so Neil's going to go get a rental car, and he's going to drive his way back to Chicago. But that's not going to go as he plans, James.
No. And this rental car scene, when he goes up to the desk, he's actually got to talk to actor Eddie McClurg. And I looked at this lady's face, and I heard her voice, and she sounds familiar. She looks familiar. You probably recognize her from a bunch of projects and voiceovers. She actually has done a couple Pixar voices. She plays Minnie in Cars opposite Richard Kind, which is that minivan couple that rolls into Radiator Springs and is looking for a map and directions. So her voice is instantaneously recognizable. But this scene is hilarious because when I clicked on this movie on Paramount Plus, it said it was rated R. And then I didn't really think about it because I was just like, all right, okay, I guess it's rated R. It doesn't seem like it'd be a rated R movie. And because of this one scene with Steve Martin and Eddie McClurg, he comes up to the rental desk and she's all like, okay, all right, I'll see you later on the phone. And he is pissed. Like, he's been dealt, he's been snowed out of airports. He has got his money stolen. He's sick of the shit. And when he rolls up to the rental car lot, the key he was given for the rental car, there's no car there. So he has to walk all the way back past the tarmac and the parking lot, 3 miles back to the rental car desk. And he just lays it on this lady. And he drops the F-bomb 18 times.
Well, I'll see you tomorrow then. Gobble, gobble. Welcome to Marathon. May I help you?
You can start by wiping that fucking dumbass smile off your rosy fucking cheeks.
And I thought, whoa, this is a lot of swearing.
So
because up to
aggressive.
this point, it seems like it's been PG. This could have been a PG-13 movie. So this is the only time we have an R-rated section in the movie. I thought that was so interesting.
This
because
is the
you
part
can-
that got fast forward as a kid. Like, oh yeah, this
Yeah.
part, fast forward.
Yeah, because it's very clear. It's a hard F that Steve Martin's dropping
And like you
18
said,
times.
18 times. It's aggressive.
I thought it was a nice sacrifice of ratings to perhaps box office revenue for the meaning of the moment. Because a lot of times, Steven Spielberg, Temple of Doom. Temple of Doom came out before PG-13 was a thing. That was actually one of the movies, and Steven Spielberg was one of the reasons why Hollywood lobbied for that PG-13 rating, because you get more money if you can have kids come to the theaters. So what do you feel about that being put into the movie, knowing that they could a 4-hour movie, they could very well cut that bit out, and they decided to leave it in for the sake of comedy, for the sake of Neil hitting a breaking point? Is that badass or is that a bad move?
Here, my thoughts on it are: we know Steve Martin now, like you said, Pink Panther, Cheaper by the Dozen, Only Murders in the
Only Murders.
Building. But Steve Martin, a lot of these guys, you forget. I mean, even guys like Bob Saget, who were Full House kind of guys, they were pretty raunchy comics.
Potty mouths.
Yeah, Steve Martin was not a clean comic by any stretch of the imagination. His stand-ups, other stuff he had done. So we think about him now as the silver-haired grandpa kind of, a look into the past of comedy. But in his
Family
day and
comedy
age,
guy.
in his day and age, Steve Martin was edgy and doing his thing. So I think you see John Candy and you see Steve Martin on the bill. And back in the late 80s, if you're a dad or a mom, you're not taking your kid to see that. You're like, oh no, an R-rated movie with that Steve Martin guy, like they're going off the rails. So it was very focused, that R-rated section.
Bold
like
choice.
You said.
Bold choice.
It's a bold choice, and it could have easily been cut and made this more of a family timeless comedy. But
I think it makes it such a standout scene for
It
that
does.
reason. It's
It
jarring
does, and like-
because you're not
Yeah.
because it's been so like tame, and then all of a sudden it's just F-bomb drop.
I was sitting there, I was like, when is this going to end? And he just keeps going. And I'd be interested to know if John Hughes' 4-hour cut was a lot more R-rated than what we actually got. I wouldn't be surprised
Yeah.
if that was the case. But it was fun to see this inserted in there. Like, yep, we're not
So interesting.
censoring Steve Martin. Like, this is still what you paid for. This is still Steve
It's
Martin,
so
John
interesting.
Candy. It really was.
It's just a minute of
I
just
didn't expect
like,
it.
oh, this is an R-rated movie now, and then the other 88 minutes is PG-13. It's so peculiar. I think it's a cool choice.
I do too.
So, guess what? Dell is going to come to the rescue with his own rental car, and this is that Chrysler Town and Country convertible that makes an appearance in Deadpool and Wolverine. And before this, Steve Martin gets into another curbside altercation with some guy who punches him in the face and picks him up by his testicles. After he gets picked up by Dell, I laughed out loud when Dell said, "Wow, I've never seen a grown man get picked up by his balls before. That was interesting."
I've never seen a guy get picked up by his testicles before.
Oh my gosh, this is funny. This is funny.
It really was. So we're traveling down the road. We're in this rental car. Dell does end up driving after Neil was driving, and Dell's playing with the reclining mechanism of the seat, going up and down and up and down. A lot of physical humor here, and I just don't know if we have those physical humor comics like we did, like a John Candy or a Chris Farley or even a Jim Carrey back in the day, where that physical comedy, the faces, what they're doing, it's really good. But Dell starts driving. He's smoking his cigarette. He throws his cigarette out the window. It blows back into the back seat. A fire is starting in the car, and Dell's trying to take his jacket off while he's driving. He's driving with his knees. There's also a part before that where he's driving on the wrong side of the road.
Both.
I mean,
the sleeves. One sleeve gets stuck on the recliner knob, and then the other sleeve gets stuck on something else, and he's like strapped to the chair. Yeah, a lot of great physical comedy gags going to work here. And it does. Humor. Yeah, it ends up with like a crash, and then he's going the wrong direction, almost gets hit by a truck, and then they get out to go get the luggage that's spilled all over the freeway.
Real quick, there's a part where they're going the wrong way on the freeway. Yes. And
the skeletons.
There's another car going the right way down the freeway, and they look over there going, "You're going the wrong way." And Neil and Dell look at each other and go, "Well, how would they know where we're going? They don't know we're going the wrong way."
Yeah.
That had me laughing. I was like, that's a classic mix-up. Classic mix-up. And then, they're going the wrong way. They go between two semi-trucks, and then there's this flash of them as like skeletons.
Quick cut, yeah.
It was really it was funny.
It was like kind of like that just out of nowhere bonkers joke. Just like the cab memory in the airport. I was like, oh, we're kind of getting a little not experimental, but just we're getting goofy.
Prop
is
humor
what I'm trying
almost.
to say.
Like prop humor.
Prop humor. We're getting
John
very
Hughes was getting involved.
We're getting carrot toppy in a good way.
But the car catches on fire, burns up, but we're going to drive this crispy car all the way up until we get pulled over by a police officer. Another hilarious interaction that I did laugh out loud at, where the cop clocks him at 78. And he goes, "You know how fast you're going?" He goes, "I'm sorry, officer. All my dashboard, all my gauges are melted." He goes, "Except the radio." Funny enough, the radio crystal clear, but no. So the car gets towed, and then they end up catching a refrigeration truck. I think for like a milk truck, like a semi with a refrigerated truck that's going to get them back to Chicago. So this is the last leg of our journey. We're headed home, and Neil.
Nick, can I insert a very favorite tidbit I found about this movie?
Absolutely.
Okay. I'll have to read off my phone here because it was a screenshot from a Vanity Fair article. But that truck driver that you mentioned. So the truck driver is played by an actor named Troy Evans. So they basically hired this guy to do one line and work one day. And he was going to work in LA. And remember I said they were chasing the snow and chasing the weather and blah, blah, blah. And they're going to have to shoot this guy in a semi-truck outside somewhere where it's snowing. So they hired him and offered him $1,000 for one day to go in and read one line. And his agent called him and they said they've decided they're going to shoot the scene in New York. And he says, "Oh, okay, so I'm off the movie." And they said, "No, you're going to go to New York." So at this time, because they were chasing the snow, they do what is called a hold. So when you have an actor that you have contracted out or have paid or want to be in the movie, on the call sheet, sometimes it's going to be when you're on a movie, your status might be SW, which is start work, which is your first day of shooting, W for working, and then WF for work finish. And then there's that H on there, which is hold, which means you're holding the actor. So they're holding this guy and they're going all over the place trying to find the snow. They say, "Hey, if it snows, we're going to shoot you in the truck and we need the snow blowing." But it didn't snow. They kept holding Evans for this one scene at $1,000 a day. So as the company moved from Buffalo to Ohio to St. Louis to Illinois, they were taking him along for the ride at each new location. So this dude is literally just he's literally living the movie. He's just planes, trains, automobiles, traveling around. Troy Evans says, "I don't remember. It might have been 11 cities in total. Pretty sure we finally shot the scene in Kankakee, Illinois on my 51st day. So I left home not having $300 in rent And when I got back home, having done my one line in the movie, we bought our first house. So $51,000 is what Troy Evans made because they held him. Talk about hitting the lottery.
You barely even saw him in the movie, too. I mean, because I noticed when the truck rolled up, you just have Dell hanging out the passenger seat going, "Get on in." I mean, this guy has legitimately one line. What a gig, dude. What a gig.
Bought a house. Lucky. I think it's a perfect opportunity to throw out some popcornios because we do have an obvious one that we actually both clocked, which is a super, 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 super young friend of the show, Matthew Lawrence, via...
I was just going to bring that up, yeah.
Jumping Ship, the Disney Channel original movie, and a cameo in Horse Sense. He was also the kid in Mrs. Doubtfire, so he's been around in some projects.
Yeah.
A top tier, finally, Nick, finally, top tier facial recognition from your boy Captain Pop. Dylan Baker is an actor. He plays Owen, which is that kind of redneck guy that pulls up in that truck and with the strong wife that says she's got a strong back or something. I don't know. I recognize this guy not from many projects. I know his face, but specifically for no reason, he lives rent free in my mind as Dr. Connors from Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2. That's Dylan Baker, and he played a funny redneck.
Sure is. There is actually a couple fun cameos in this movie. I didn't bring it up at the time, but Doobby, our taxi driver, was also the redneck guy who owned the junkyard in Breaking Bad. So there were quite a few.
Oh, okay.
The magnets, bitch. That guy, the guy who helps him do the magnet thing. So I saw that.
Oh, okay, that's cool. Yeah, Larry Hankin.
Look him up. Yeah, if you look him up, you're like, oh yeah, I know that face.
All right, home stretch, Nick. We're in the freezing cheese truck. We're on our way to. I see your note. It's fucking Matthew Lawrence. Oh, I stole your thunder. I'm sorry.
No, I know. No,
I stole your
thunder.
Good. But I did recognize him earlier, so technically we should have brought him up in the beginning.
I gotcha. So we're gonna get back, and Neil says goodbye to Dell. They shake hands. Hey, we're friends. Neil's going to start heading home, and now he's going to put the pieces together, James, that you've been mentioning throughout this movie, where he's homeless. He makes comments of, I haven't been home in years. Oh, that's just a turn of phrase. Like, I've been home. Mentions his wife sort of in the past tense, is very nostalgic about his wife, but also hasn't been home, lives on the road. And Neil puts it together. This guy's wife has passed. And when he does go back to find Dell, and he does find him in a train station, he says, "What are you doing here? I thought you were going home." And Dell admits to him, "My wife passed 8 years ago." I'm not going to lie, James. I got a little teary-eyed. I was like, I was so invested in Dell's character, that to hear that sort of pain in his voice and that sort of realization. I wish the scene was a little longer because it sort of cuts off. And then the end of the movie is Neil brings him back to his house. They have Thanksgiving together with, Neil, his family. Neil appreciates his wife and his kids more, and then credits roll. But I really thought that moment of Neil and Dell sort of reconciling, and Neil figuring out that Dell is just this lonely man who's trying to make the most out of his life and is very lost without his wife, and is trying to meet people and do the right thing and live in the moment, like he said, because clearly his life ended 8 years ago when his wife passed, and now he's trying to just live and meet people. I thought that moment could have been played out a little more, but a 4-hour screenplay, you cut what you got to cut. And so that ending sort of got condensed a little bit.
We end on a freeze frame of a smiling Dell, and then we hit credits, directed by John Hughes. But then we do get a post-credit scene.
We do. I did not expect a post-credit scene
of the just like a la Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Of that same of Neil's boss still staring at the same advertisements, and it's like, what a great little bit just to A little
Yeah.
post-credit treat. We need those. I love those. Give me something.
Me too.
Give me something to look forward to. That is Planes, Trains, and Automobiles from 1987, directed by John Hughes. I do want to talk about the ending, like you said. So, fun fact, the ending was recut from the original ending because it was originally going to be Del was going to follow Neil home and see him to his front door and then spill his guts about how he's homeless, his wife is actually dead. And then Neil was going to, not out of pity, but kind of out of pity, invite him inside because he heard his sob story. So it was actually recut, and they were rolling on Steve Martin in the train car when Steve Martin didn't think they were rolling. They just thought he was waiting and trying to memorize his lines. And John Hughes loved his like pensive look and thought, oh, this would be a great opportunity to recut this and have it be like, oh, Neil figured it out that Del is a lonely guy, and then goes back to Del, makes Del not look like more of a clingy loser stalker, but more of just a human being, a character. And there was a huge, big monologue that John Candy had for the end scene, which I agree with you, Nick. I did think it was missing that because I did want to relish in that moment a little bit more.
It was really
I thought
powerful. It was like surprisingly powerful for a comedy. Like I got a little emotional, when he realized that this guy's wife was just dead.
Yeah, and then you think back to all the parts in the movie where it's like, oh, that makes sense, and Del's such a fun, nice guy. Comedies, the peaks and valleys of seriousness and funnies, they hit harder because you get to enjoy the roller coaster ride of going up and down. But I did think it was missing a little bit more of just, we didn't need him to start sobbing and breaking down, but just like, let me squirt that tear out. Let me get that tear out. Spend more time with Del as he's being vulnerable with Neil. And then we can continue on with the happy ending.
Yeah, I didn't need Del to spill his guts. I would have loved to see Neil maybe draw parallels to his life where maybe he'd taken advantage of his family and then sort of reconcile that. I also, it actually makes sense now that you're saying it, because I had this thought at the ending of the movie where Neil is playing back all the things Del said, and I'm like, you wouldn't necessarily draw a straight line to his wife has died, or he's single now because he talked about his wife. So I feel like if you would have had that thought from the original script, you could have maybe dropped a few more breadcrumbs along the way, because I didn't think the breadcrumb trail was quite there to draw you the straight line from him talking about his wife and being on the road to, oh, his wife is dead. So that makes sense that at the last minute, John Hughes was like, oh, wait, this might be a more powerful
We should
moment.
recut this.
Yeah, for Neil to realize, right? So if your plan was to have Del spill the guts and be more expository, then yeah, that checks out. But for Neil to connect the dots in his head, I didn't think there was enough there. I still think it was a really good ending to the movie, but I feel like it could have been built out a little more. And if you're chasing snow, you can't go back and reshoot any of those scenes. So I get that. Right. John Hughes was working with what he had. I thought it was the right direction for it, but could have had a few more fill-in scenes there, but I can't be too critical of that personally.
So the I like me speech, I think that should have came maybe at the middle of the movie, and then we should have had a similar, like, this is the time where it's okay to be serious, and just give me like a minute or two of Neil and Del talking as human beings and relating to each other. And us just really getting emotional in that scene. And then we can smash cut to the iconic shot of the movie where they're holding the trunk and walking side by side down the middle of the street. And then we can enjoy the ending. But yeah, I thought it was a great, a lot of funny jokes, a lot of zingers, a lot of just John Candy humor, a lot of Steve Martin humor, John Hughes writing humor. It was great. It was fun. It was fun to watch. Highly recommend this one.
Well, on that John Candy train, sort of, and how he portrays himself,
Planes and
even Steve
automobiles.
Martin. Yeah. How he nice. So, how do you feel about this era of gags, physical comedy? Like, so I said this earlier in the plot talk. This hits me right in my sweet spot. I love physical comedy. I love a comedian who has that sort of face, who can do a little bit of riffing for 30 seconds of struggling to get a jacket off. I don't know. It's a little, call it lowbrow if you want, but it's right where I live, and I like that. So, and I also said, this is a little a la Tommy Boy, which is an all-timer for me, right? It's just a classic. So for you, that's how I feel. For you, how do you feel about this sort of era of gags, physical comedy? You see it coming, but it still kind of hits you and makes you laugh.
I don't think it's like an extinct form of comedy. I think we can still see that in today's movies. Do facial expressions count as physical comedy?
Absolutely. For me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, then there's a lot of physical comedy in this, but I did think it was very well balanced. I thought it was just great comedic writing. And John Candy, when he read the script, he said this script is hilarious. So adding on to the 85 days was John Hughes would look at Steve Martin and say, "Hey, Steve, you're going to improv, and John Candy and whoever, you're going to stick to the script. Now we're going to do a take where, hey, John Candy, now you're going to improv, Steve and other person, you're going to stick to the script. And then we're going to alternate, and I'm going to see what works." So I think there's just like good writing, and there's good delivery, and there's good performers. And I think whether it's written jokes or improv or physical comedy, if you are a good performer and a funny person, you gotta be funny. Then I think it's going to work. So I don't know if I would necessarily agree that this is nailed down to an era of types of comedy. I think this is just good comedy is what I would say to that.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. The more era I'm talking, yeah, I hear what you're saying. When I said era, I mean, again, kind of in that vein of almost SNL
maybe like types
humor.
of movies that we get.
Yeah, types. Maybe eras is the wrong word there, but more of a like very specific niche subgenre of like in my mind, there's only a handful of actors who can really give you that physical comedy, like a Jim Carrey's one of those guys who can really carry a movie with his physical comedy bit, like an Ace Ventura, right? That's just him making faces, being a whack job, where you say, "Oh wow, like that movie without Jim Carrey is a really dumb comedy," but he really kind of brings it to life. So yeah, not era. You're right. Era is the wrong word for it. It's more of a very specific style that is built for very specific comedians, like a John Candy.
Nick, my only talking point and question for you is the John Hughes process of this film. So like I said, he can bust out a script in 3 days, and he will spend 85 days blowing it up with improv and testing out different chemistries and seeing what works and what takes are going to make the biggest laugh in the theaters. And then he needs to concise it back down to a 90-minute movie. So for this entire process of Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, just like the rated R decision of that 10-minute segment, is it stupid or is it genius? Because I feel like the net result can kind of give away the answer, because this is a very classic movie. It's very popular. It's a movie that people put on every Thanksgiving, and it's iconic. So what's your take on John Hughes busting out a script in 3 days and shooting like a madman for 85 days and having to cut out 2.5 hours of material to get what he wants? Is that ridiculous and a waste of money, or does it work because you got what you got?
I think it works personally. This might get a little weird, maybe a little philosophical. I don't know. I think this is a great way to approach art. I think it's a great way to approach your work. I think it's a great way to approach life. where you just accept this large vision and then you funnel it down to the best refined product. And I think that's a great way to approach things in life. Start general when you don't quite, right? That's how, the only way you could bust out a script in 3 days is if you know that you're going to have to cut some things out, but you say, hey, we're starting with all the ideas. And as we run it through people and as we filter it and as we see what is being produced, then, you know, if you're going to start with 4 hours, you also need to have the lack of ego to funnel it down. And so that, you know, it's a two-step process, right? It's a throw all your ideas at the wall the best you can, and then also put your ego in your back pocket to let things get cut down and to take the advice of other people and say, this isn't necessary. Oh, this is really good. Oh, this part could be cut down. So it's not a singular process just by John Hughes. It's a multifaceted process, again, that I think a lot more people in the world should take in every facet of their life, which is start with big expectations, but with zero ego, and let it filter down through multiple channels until you get the best damn product you can come out with. And it sounds like that's the way John Hughes works. And I think it's wonderful. I think that's a great way to live your life. I think that's a great way to produce things.
Yeah, it seems, I think in the moment, it may seem like a big giant waste, especially to like maybe an exec at Paramount. And they're thinking, what the hell? You just did an 85-day shoot and now we're not even going to use 40, 50 days of what you did. Like, what the hell, John? But I think the net result proves that it was worth it. And it's so crazy that they made this on $15 million because I'm looking at Fatal Attraction, which was $14 million budget, which was the same exact year of release. They seem like totally different production needs as far as where money would go. I'm not sure if it's actors or what, but Fatal Attraction is not a crazy road trip movie where you're going all over the place really, and you're like shooting for a bunch of
sets.
days.
It's really just like 6 sets.
Yeah.
In Fatal Attraction.
And then The Thing from 1982 also had a $15 million budget, which is also wild because that had a lot of prosthetics and special effects, makeup and puppetry going to work there. So, and they had to, you know, just pump the cold air into the sound stage. So, I mean, I don't know if that would really cost a lot of money for the AC, but yeah, it's interesting what you could do with that amount of money. That amount of money is interesting.
Yeah, there's
and you paid Troy Evans $52,000 to be on hold.
Good for Troy.
Jeez.
Yeah, there's in my line of work, right? I'm in tech, and this won't resonate with you, but maybe a couple listeners. There's an idea in technology of how to develop products called agile. That's the agile way of doing things, and the way you do agile is you start and you just develop, and then you find out what works, and then you drill down and refine the best possible product. And that's what John Hughes is doing. He's saying, hey, man, let's film all these scenes. Let's do these things. Let's write this script. And as we go, we're going to refine this down and collaborate, and we're going to value product over the process.
I think it was definitely worth it at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, Nick, we need to get into our awards, which is our mini pops. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. It is the best. It is the worst. It is Planes, Trains, and Automobiles for the awards. And we're going to start out our awards with the best weapon. Not a lot of fights or weapons in this movie, but Nick, I think we came to an agreement pre-record that the best weapon is going to be Dell's cigarette because it lit the entire Chrysler Town and Country on fire, which was the most effective thing that caused the most amount of damage in this movie.
Dell started the fire.
And where there's fire, there might be a fighter or a firefighter. Because now we're going to discuss the best fighter of this movie. Also pre-record, I think we kind of landed on the guy that grabbed Steve Martin by the ball sack and threw a punch at his face. He's kind of like Sandwich Guy from Duel, just an average Joe slugger on the street. Just
That guy had problems at home, and he took it out on a stranger on the curb.
Took it out on Neil's nuts.
He knocked this guy out, and Dell's like, "Help him out." And the guy was like, "I'll help him up," and then just grabbed him by the ball sack and lifted him in the air. It's like, whoa. Like, how bad is your life going where you just see a stranger on the ground and someone says, "Hey, help him up," and you're like, "I'll help him," and you just grab his testicles. I mean, to grab a guy's testicles
and to hoist him up
takes conviction. I don't think I could ever mess with another man's sack. I know how much it hurts, to be jostled around.
Yeah, that guy
in that area.
He has no remorse.
Yeah, you have to not care about another human being to
He just wrote down guy who grabs Neil by the sack.
It's insane, dude. It's an insane proposition.
St.
To
Louis,
think someone
man.
looks at you and says, "Hey, help this guy up," and you're like, "Oh, I'll help him up," and just
whammy.
And Neil wakes up for a split second beforehand, looks up, and he just sees this guy's hand come in and just wham right in his balls. Man, that's tough.
And then we cut to that scene in the car when Dell says, "I've never seen a guy get hoisted up by his nuts before. That was really something." And Neil is just hating Dell, and
his voice is high because his nuts have been messed with.
Oh yeah, which is gonna segue us into the MVC of this movie, most valuable character. Nick didn't even need to talk about it, but it's gonna be Del Griffith.
It's Del Griffith. Yeah. It's Del Griffith. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, happy-go-lucky, hilarious.
Heart and soul of this movie.
Yeah.
Major plot point driver, major humorous driver, major heart driver. And you know who doesn't have heart, Nick? That's going to be the biggest piece of shit of this movie, which might actually need a small bit of discussion. So let's run through the usual suspects here. Who do we got, Nick?
So for me, I had in the opening scene the cab lawyer who extorts
Neil
for all the way up to $75. So this falls into our piece of shit per second on screen. Then there's the guy who grabs Neil by the sack, which we talked about. That takes a special kind of psycho.
Also, screen time to piece of shit ratio.
Very small. But then there's also Neil, who is constantly trying to ditch Del after Del has been helping him this whole time. Does his salesman trick to pay for food, is clearly only trying to help. And every time Neil and Del start to bond, Neil comes up with an excuse to ditch him. He rips into him like stuff that would keep you up at night that might send you to a psychiatrist. I mean, Neil lays into Del a lot. Obviously, his screen he has a redemption arc, so that kind of helps his case.
Yeah, there's too many.
Talk to me.
There's too many redeeming moments. There's too many redeeming moments for Neil because he goes and picks up the suitcase in the mud field, invites him into the hotel when he's freezing in the car. Neil's too much of a main character with appropriate positives to negative flaws. So it is going to come down to a screen time ratio guy here. So
I think cab
lawyer, or guy who grabs Neil by the sack and punches him out. Neil was kind of egging him on for that. Cab lawyer just took advantage of the moment and just
that was not the first time cab lawyer's done this.
Anyone who'd pay $50 for a cab certainly pay $75.
He's pulled this shit in New York. This bibbity boppity New York bullshit. Bing bong.
Bing bang.
All right, Nick. Well, that's what we got for the awards. Let's wrap up our talking segment with our sarcastic selling points. I'm going to hit you first. It's not going to be as funny as this movie, but my sarcastic selling point is Thanksgiving road trip odd couple buddy movie. That's it.
I said Thanksgiving Tommy Boy.
That's better.
Final review. Fight.
Final review time. Let's talk about what the other guys are saying about this movie. And then we'll get into what we think about this movie. We're going to start out with Rotten Tomatoes. The critics 92% of the critics gave this a 70. They loved it.
Holy smokes, awesome. And the people on Rotten Tomatoes not far behind at an 87%.
Who is trailing a little bit behind on those train tracks and on the road and in the air is Metacritic, because the critic score is a 72, translates to a 7.2 on the popcorn scale.
But our people at Metacritic have this at a 7.7.
Wow. And now
for a grab 'em
by the sack. Hit the road, Jack. And don't you come back, score. Brought to you by some New York bibbity bing bong bullshit. From IMDb, a 7.6. Oh my gosh, we must be traveling partners sitting next to each other on the same row in the airplane, renting the same car, sleeping in the same bed because we have the same exact thoughts. That's what everybody else thinks. Now it's time to tell you what we think. Starting with our laughable log lines, Nick, I'm going to hit you first with my popcorn points and my final thoughts on this movie. My laughable log line is: a grouchy New York business guy is escorted to Chicago by a hobo shower ring salesman. And Nick, I'm going to get this a 8.0, flat 8, a nice clean 8 across the board. It was great. I wonder if you have the same score because you have your hands to your heads. Yeah, it seems like it. Yeah. I don't want to compare and contrast like we do, but I was thinking about it, and I actually brought up this movie a couple minutes ago or a couple moments ago. Fatal Attraction. We thought that was a really great execution of a thriller suspense movie. Very character driven. We thought the performance by Glenn Close was fantastic. A couple things we would have liked changed, so that's why it's not a perfect 10. It doesn't hit the 9s. But this movie is great. It's super funny. It totally holds up. There's not really any thing that doesn't age well. You know, maybe some slight homophobia with the hotel comedy gag, but
whoa,
not really.
I'm not that kind of guy.
Yeah, it's like
funny.
Yeah, all right, that's fine. The comedy is like you said, the staring at the bed and like the ominous score, and they're strangers, and it's like there's not much like outdated stuff. Like we've watched some movies with some outdated ass stuff and content, and yeah, this one just hits, man. This is a classic for a reason. The things I would have liked changed, I've already said. I'll say it again just to recap, but the I Like Me monologue should have came later, should have been a little bit more earned. We both agreed that ending scene could have used a little bit more screen time with an emotional Dell and an emotional Neil. I think we earned it then. It would have loved to get that payoff of a coming to Jesus, a confession scene, a spill your heart out scene at the end, and really just relish the moment of the journey these two characters went on throughout this entire movie. But yeah, honestly, this is a solid comedy. I'll end my review with this. This movie needs to exist. This story needs to exist. We've watched movies plenty of movies where we said this movie doesn't need to exist. This is one of those movies that needs to exist. This is a template for a great comedy. Tommy Boy, like you said, Due Date with Zach Galifianakis and Robert Downey Jr. I love Due Date. I know it's a direct remake and inspired by Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, but this is a perfect type of story. This is a classic tale, and it's just the fact that it revolves around Thanksgiving. You got a heartwarming ending. This is a story and a movie that needs to exist, and I'm happy John Hughes came up with it and put Steve Martin and John Candy in front of a camera, and they spent 85 days out in the snow to make this movie, because guess what? It was worth it. So highly recommend. 8.0 from me. Nick, hit me with your laughable logline, please.
I love it, man. Laughable logline from me: an 80s stereotypical advertising exec travels the country with a guy on the spectrum.
Oh, no.
It's an 8.0, buddy. It's an 8.0.
Yeah.
I fought a long time internally on, is this a 7.8, a 7.9,
Me too.
a 7?
Me
And then
too.
I said, no, dude, it's just an 8. It is what it is. For all the reasons that you said. I love how you put that. It needs to exist. I didn't think about that, but I couldn't agree more on it. This is really funny too. It's a really funny movie. We've watched some sort of semi-comedies, some movies that were supposed to be funny. Like, this is funny. And there's a part of me, and I feel like you and I are maybe in that generation where we're bridging the gap between some of these older comics and the new age stuff. And if you're listening to this and you were born after the year 2000 by chance, John Candy is one of the funnier guys you'll ever see. I mean, he is, and his life was cut very short. Prime John Candy, it's really hard to beat. And old school Steve Martin is really hard to beat. And these guys are just fantastic together. And add that on top of John Hughes writing and directing. Like, this is a awesome movie. It's hilarious. If you have a family and you just fast forward the rental car scene with Steve Martin where he drops his 18 F-bombs, like, this could easily be a family watch. It's constructed well. It has the perfect amount of like storyline moving forward / shenanigans happening, the physical comedy, the written comedy, the actors who can just look at the source material and say, yeah, I got this. Like, this is right up my alley. You could tell the parts that were improv that were really well done. And just awesome work, man. It's just awesome work. And, I think this needs to live on. Like you said, it needed to be made, and it needs to live on as a top tier comedy. Just in the annals of history, where you say, yeah, what are those key moments? What are those key comedies that sort of drive the genre forward? 1987's Plane, Trains, and Automobiles needs to be on that list to say, hey, if you want to be a comedic actor, I mean, clearly, like you were talking about, Ryan Reynolds saw this and said, hey, this is inspiring to me to move forward in my career. If you're an inspiring comedic actor or a person who loves comedies, you have to see this one. This is an awesome movie. This is a wonderful comedy. And I'm going to be rewatching this a lot. Honestly, I'm going to be rewatching this a lot because it's great.
Yep, absolutely. Must see cinema. I agree. This is an annual watch. You got to watch this every Thanksgiving. We don't get a lot of Thanksgiving movies, so you got to put this on. This is too good. Too much good performances, too much good direction and writing, and the premise. Like I said, it is perfect, but not good enough because it's only an 8 apparently. But that's really great from us.
For a comedy, 8's
a universally agreed comedy. 8, fantastic. 8 is great. And that's going to be it. That is Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. First watch for me, first-ish watch for you, and we loved it. A very thankful filled season. We want to thank you for listening. Thank you for following us. If you follow us, if you're not following us, please follow us on Instagram and YouTube at Just Play It Podcast. You can follow us on X at Just Play It Pod. We're going to be so incredibly thankful for that. You're going to definitely want to tune in next time because it is our last movie review of the year. And this is going to be a movie with the same exact title that we watched last year.
Yeah, take what we watched last year and make it a little more devious.
It's about to get frosty. Okay, everybody, we're heading gone. And remember, if you need to make that flight out of New York and the only cab is in competition with a lineless Kevin Bacon, you're not going to win that race, buddy. Just get an Uber, hop into the new century, and hopefully you'll run into a Del Griffith because we can all use a Del in our lives.
I mean, to grab a guy's testicles
and to hoist them up
takes conviction.